guys. Hi, Belinda. Hi, Soul Teresa. How are you guys doing today?
Good. How about you?
I'm feeling well today.
Welcome to our third session for week 1. We're going to go through the announcements, and we went over creating your sitemap yesterday. We'll talk about it just for a little bit today, and then we're going to take a look at the assessment. We're going to go over a few things you're going to find on the assessment, and then we're going to play with Muse. Wednesday, you need to make sure you complete your daily checkpoint today, and make sure you've started watching your lynda.com videos. They're really great videos, and they're each pretty short, so it's like you can watch 1 or 2 and then get up and take care of the kids, cook dinner, do whatever you need to do, and take a break. And you're not going to be stopping at a point where you're trying to play catch up when you start the next video. They have really good ending points, so they're easy to watch a little bit at a time instead of sitting for 45 minutes and just watching them. Complete your initial post for your discussion. For those of you that haven't done it, don't forget your initial post is due tonight. And then on Thursday, continue to watch the Muse Creative Cloud updates in Lynda. It's just a few sneak peeks at some new stuff that you're going to find in Muse that wasn't there before. Some new tools. We'll be going over them in the lectures too. And start thinking about your sitemap and your pages on Thursday. I would go ahead and get that knocked out of the way, since it's going to be a very quick assignment. It won't take you long to do that sitemap. So get it out of the way so you can concentrate on your creative brief. If you need help, you can come see me or Christy in the SSC. Christy's schedule is posted, and I will be there on Thursday evening from 8 to 11 p.m. Mountain Time. And again on Friday from 4 to 11 p.m. Mountain Time. On Friday, make sure you complete that daily checkpoint and finish up your sitemap so it's done, and start your questionnaire. Start designing your cover page and your table of contents, and get your typography all laid out. Get your text set, your headings, and your paragraph text, and get all that stuff done. On Saturday, finish up that creative brief with any final touches and get all of your answers in, and then turn it in and have fun for the rest of the weekend, guys, because you've done it. Once that assessment's done, you're finished for the week. And then next week, we will really start playing with Muse. This week's discussion is over usability. The question specifically says research website usability, user experience, what the requirements of a website accessibility are, and summarize what you found and explain how you will incorporate what you have learned from this research in your portfolio website, and how it will help you answer some of the questions that need to be addressed in your creative brief. What does usability and accessibility mean? Most generally, when we think about web accessibility, we associate that with the disabled, right? More specifically, most of the time it's the disability that you pull first in your brain is usually the blind, right? Because we know that all of the web browsers will allow text-to-speech. You turn it on and it will read you the website. But really, accessibility covers all of the disabilities, plus things that you wouldn't even consider disabilities. Think about your elderly. What are the common traits of the elderly? What would make it hard on them to read a website? What kind of trouble would they have viewing a website? Most commonly, they find the text is too small, right? They have a hard time reading it. So if you are designing a website that the target market is the elderly, what is one of the things you're going to do? you're going to make that text bigger, right? Can you guys hear me? Can you guys hear me?
Yes.
You can hear me?
Yes.
Okay. So you have to keep things like that in mind. If your target market is a certain category or group, you're going to want to make things more accessible for them. Not necessarily because they have a disability, just because there's something that they would find it easier to view that website. And that's accessibility wraps around all of that. So it's not just disabilities. And you think about the hearing impaired. The web has really increased accessibility there. And most videos now you find have CC captioning, right? All of the YouTube videos you can turn on CC captioning now. And those they don't just benefit the hearing impaired, they benefit us as well, right? How many of us have watched a video at work and turned off the volume and turned on the closed captioning? Yes, or watching a video around your kids. Absolutely. So it doesn't just benefit the disabled, the hearing impaired, the blind. Accessibility pertains to all of us, and simply things that make it easier for us to use a website. As graphic designers, we have to you have to consider those aspects. And not just towards the disability, but towards your target market. What would make it easier for them to use the website? That sort of thing. Sometimes that means simple buttons, breaking things down. If your target market were kids, what are some of the things you might do in order to make it easier for a child to use that website? Design the buttons that are kid friendly, yes. Not make them a little bigger. Make sure they stand out. You would probably use more pictures versus text, right? Kids aren't fluent readers, but they can tell a lot from an image. So while yes, you're going to use some text, pictures and icons and those type of directional things that lead them to do what they need to do, it's going to be much simpler for them to understand than trying to read a bunch of text, right? It's just the way it works. Okay, we went over the sitemap demo yesterday, so if you missed that, you can watch the recording that's found on the live lecture page. But the sitemap is, simply put, it is a map of your web pages. It basically says from the home page, you can get to the portfolio page, the service page, the about page, the contact page, and from the portfolio page, you can get to the print design, web design, illustration, photo manipulation page. From the about page, this sitemap shows you can get to the resume. Now, as I stated yesterday, make sure you edit the template so that it only shows the pages you are going to have. If you turn in the sitemap template the way it is, you will be required to have these, 10 pages? 6, yeah, these 10 pages finished by the end of week 3. So make sure you edit that template to only show the pages you are going to have on your website. And remember, you have to have a minimum of 4. Your home page, your portfolio page, your about page, and your contact page. From the creative brief, you can look at your number 9 question. It will tell you about the assignment requirements. The sitemap will give you a start, and that sitemap is going to help you answer question number 9. So be sure you complete that sitemap and you've given it some thought on what kind of pages you need. As I mentioned yesterday, most of you don't have enough work to fill numerous pages. So put them all on the portfolio page. You don't want to have just 1 or 2 examples on each page. The minimum for your portfolio page, because I don't want anyone panicking. Some of you don't have a whole lot of work at all that you want to show on your portfolio, but you all should have at least 3 designs you're willing to show in your portfolio. So the minimum number on the portfolio page is 3 pieces. If you decide to break your work up and have sub-pages like Photoshop, photo manipulation, illustration, and so forth, the minimum on each page is 3. So if you do not have enough work to fill those pages, just put it all on your portfolio page. As I stated yesterday, my own website, on my portfolio page, I update it often, but I only keep about 10 designs on there at a time. And I only have a portfolio page. I didn't break it up. I don't want to overwhelm my users so that they have to sit and click through a million different examples of stuff. I put the 10 best things I have that are the most recent and go from there. Okay, let's talk about the assessment unless anybody has any questions over the sitemap or the creative brief. I hope you guys have already started thinking about it, have been thinking about it since the end of yesterday's lecture and thinking about the answers to your questions and what you really want to get out of your portfolio site. I know those creative ideas are probably already running around screaming in your head about what you should do and you can't decide on one. Answering those questions will help you do that. So let's talk about control and the difference between print design and web design. Muse is an application that allows print designers to create a working website. Do you have more control in print design or web design? Now, what I'm talking about control is, do you have more control over the color, the font, the size, in print design or in web design? Absolutely, in print design. In web design, how many of you know that you can go into your web browser like Safari or Google Chrome or Firefox, and you can go to your settings and change them so that all the font is a certain size and a certain type? Doesn't matter what's on the web page. You can set it for your web browser. So you have pretty limited control in web design as far as what the end users see, because they can manipulate what they see, right? You're going to have quite a few questions on that assessment that pertain to this, and control and limited control versus print versus web. So stop and actually think about those questions in the way of size, font, color. How many of you have noticed that a website's color may look different on your desktop versus your cell phone? Belinda plays with those preferences quite often, yes. Have any of you noticed that sometimes the color of a website will look different on a desktop versus a cell phone? It's gotten a lot better in recent years, but it's still there sometimes. And that's simply because of the monitor. They're all different, right? Apple has the new monitor that has the HD stuff in it and that sort of thing versus a Windows monitor that's not quite as high end. So things tend to look a little different. So while you do have some control over the color, it may look slightly different on another device. So it gives you limited control. Yes, there is usually a big difference between a Mac and a PC, and that is because Macs were are generally used for graphics, design, that sort of thing, because the image is much crisper, the colors come through clearer, versus a PC was more designed for business use. And so the graphics and the monitors aren't as high-end as what you find in a Mac. Hence the price difference between a Mac and a PC computer. And there is a very large price difference there. Is font an issue in web design? Is font an issue in print design? Well, we kind of just talked about this. You can set the font and line breaks in print design. And once it's printed, they're like that, right? That's the way they are. There's no changing them unless you edit the art file and reprint it. But in web design, users can override those settings, as Belinda was just talking about. If you have someone in your family that has eyesight issues, that sort of thing, then you may have to increase that font, make the size bigger, or you simply have someone that has a learning disability like dyslexia. You may change the font. Why? Because it's easier for them to read a certain font versus other fonts. My oldest son is a severe dyslexic, and his computer is set to a specific font that makes it easier for him to read things because it puts a larger space between the letters. And so it makes it easier for him to read. So you may have to do things like that, and that is a very good thing about websites. That all leads to accessibility, right? But in the end, the designer has little control over that because the end user can make those changes. Color. How does the web affect color? Well, we just talked about this. In print design, we use CMYK and spot color, right? We're all really familiar with that CMYK and those spot colors. And in web, we use RGB, which you guys are all familiar with because that's also what color most images are in, is RGB. The web also uses what's called a hexadecimal number, a hex color. And that, if any of you have ever noticed in Illustrator, Photoshop, InDesign, any of them, if you double click on your color icon and it opens up your panel that shows you the CMYK percentages and the RGB percentages, at the very bottom there's a little number that starts with a pound sign. That is the hexadecimal color. And it is used strictly in web design. What about size? What is the difference between the size in print design and the size in web design? You pretty much set the size in print, right? When you create your artboard, you set it one size, and that's the size it's going to be. When it gets printed, that's it. It's either 8.5 by 11, 5.5 by 8.5, whatever size you've made the artboard. When it's printed, that's what size it is. Web, though, especially in responsive design, there is no control because it's responsive. It can fit many sizes and it'll scale itself down and rearrange itself so that it looks good on that screen size. The only control you have in web design is for it to still be responsive is you can set a website, and you've probably all seen them. Any of the old sites that aren't responsive are a fixed site, and they have a width. You never set the height because it all automatically expands versus how much stuff you have on the screen. But used to, before responsiveness became so popular and in such demand, websites were fixed. You set the width, whether it be 1024, 1024 pixels, 960 pixels, whatever screen size you wanted, you set that width, and that was the max size of that website, no matter how big the person's monitor was. Now, though, websites will expand. They'll get better, bigger. They'll get smaller. You can set your website to be 100%, which means it's going to be as big as the screen, no matter how big or small the monitor. Or you can set an initial fixed size, like 1024 pixels, and then allow it to scale down to get smaller. So it's not really a fixed site, it's actually a static site. So that it will expand, but it'll never get larger than 1024 pixels or larger than whatever number you put in there. Navigation. What is navigation in print design? What is navigation in web design? Well, I bet you've never truly related navigation to print design, but when you stop and think about in print design, when we're doing magazines, booklets, that sort of thing, we use page numbers and sections and tabs, right? In reality, that's all navigation. It tells the user where to go to get to a certain thing. Just like the menu bar, navigation bar on a website. It tells the user how to get to a certain place. Or hyperlinks. How many of you have been to websites where there is a text link you can click on and the page will scroll up or down to that specific point? It's navigation. Construction. What are the different document creations between web and print? Is construction as important in print design as it is in web design? Now, what are we talking about as far as construction goes? Well, stop and think about something. Is it as important in print design that your images are only a certain DPI? Or can your images in print design be large? There's really no ending point to them besides the file size you need to be able to send that to the customer. But the reality is your images don't have to be a certain size, do they? They can be 300 DPI, they could be 600 DPI, depending on the type of project you're working on. But on the web, it's very important, isn't it? It affects your SEO and your usability. Kind of like, and it all really truly comes down to the images. That's the best example, because in web design, when you put an image on a website, you give it what's called alternative text. Meaning, how many of you experienced going to a website and the picture didn't come up, but there's this little text there where the picture's supposed to be that says what that image is? Or you've rolled over an image and a little pop-up comes up and tells you what that picture is. Most of us have seen something like that. And those are done with alternative text and tooltips. Whereas in print design, is it necessary for us to put a caption on an image to tell the user what that picture is? In print design, on our flyers and our postcards, do we put an explanation for that picture there? We don't, do we? It's just there for effect, basically. It's just a visual of whatever text happens to be on that page. But in web design, every single image, no matter the text beside it, has to have alternative text because that affects your SEO. And if the picture is too large, if you try to put a 300 DPI image on a website, it's going to load really, really slowly. Now, I know we've all experienced going to a website and it taking forever for the page to load. Or all the text comes up and suddenly the images are loading very, very slowly. They come up a little bit at a time. The reason behind that is simple image size. Those images were not made web ready. It happens all the time, sometimes by accident, Sometimes just because that person didn't know they needed to make those images web ready. As someone that just finished my computer science degree, I can tell you going over the DPI of images was never done in any of my classes. Why is that? Well, most of the time, programmers will use graphic designers to help build their graphics and their photos and things like that. So they never have to worry about the size of an image. But web designers that decide to build the website for themselves, they tend to not realize that those images need to be made web ready until they've already made that website go live. And they've either had the customer call and say, the page isn't loading, it's taking forever. And so they have to do a little research and figure out what's going on. But it's not something that is always taught in computer science classes. It is something taught in graphic design because we deal with image size all the time. Have to make sure the image is 300 DPI in print design so that it prints well, right? 300 DPI in print will print an awesome picture. Unless, of course, you try to put it on a billboard, and then you're going to want something that's more like 600, 1200 DPI. But for the most part, we're always making sure our pictures are good enough quality so they don't look pixelated, right? Well, in web design is quite the opposite. You want to make sure you have a low DPI, at least at minimum 72 DPI, at max, if you have a really complicated image or one that you really need to make sure all the details show up, you can bump that image up to 150 DPI, but it needs to be only 1 or 2 images throughout the whole site. The rest should be 72 DPI because it increases your file size a lot. And the bigger your file size is, the longer it will take that page to load. Size. What about file size? Well, we just talked about this. Is file size as important in web design as it is in print design as it is in web design? Nope. Print design, the file size is mostly irrelevant unless it keeps you from emailing or sending those files through Dropbox or SendSpace or something like that. Otherwise, in print design, it really doesn't matter how big your file size is, because when you send that off to a printer, it doesn't matter to them what size your file is, unless it's too small and you've got images on there that are pixelated. Most of the time, well, I won't say most of the time, you may get lucky. It depends on the printer you use. They will just print it because it's the files you sent them and you said they were print ready. So they're printing it. And if those images look pixelated, it's on you. Some of them will call and say, hey, you do realize that this file's not really print ready, right? And your images are going to look pixelated when they're printed. But in web design, it's hugely important. Like I said, the larger your file size is, the longer it takes your page to load. And sometimes that means a constant battle between the designer and the website because we all want it to look awesome, right? I mean, that's the end goal. We're graphic designers. We want everything to look awesome. And sometimes that means having to sit down and really go through and pick out which images need to be that 150 DPI and which ones will still look fine at 72 DPI. And sometimes that means opening them up in Photoshop and changing the DPI and taking a look at them. You would not believe how much time I have spent with an image file in Photoshop, switching back and forth between DPIs just to make sure the image still looks good at 72 because I'm doing a website that is loaded with images. And so I want as many of them as I possibly can at 72 DPI because the file size is already going to be big because there's a lot of images. So if I can keep them small at 72 DPI, that keeps my file size at least a little smaller. And the ones that have to be 150, hopefully it's few. Because in the end, when you have a website that has a lot of images on it, that file size is going to be much larger versus a website that has one image or two images and text. I did a website not long ago for a building company, and they didn't want an actual slideshow. Basically, what they wanted was a column gallery type thing. It was just little medium-sized thumbnails set 4 across, and there was something like 20 rows. Was a lot of images. It was like 80 total. That's a lot of images. That file size on that page was big, even though 90% of the images were set at 72 DPI. And it was simply because there's 80 images on that one page. It's absolutely going to increase the file size. But had all of those images been 150 DPI, well, I would have probably increased that file size 3 times what it was with most of the images at 72 DPI. So you have to keep those things in mind. Okay, let's talk about accessibility. Does accessibility apply to print design? As far as the test goes, accessibility doesn't necessarily apply to print design, but of course web design, it does. It's needed for your SEO. But I always throw this out there because I want you to stop and think about this. Accessibility is all about making it easier for someone to use a website, right? Was there any examples in print design that you can think of that makes it easier for a person to read something? There's lots of things, right? You think about Braille for the blind. That's accessibility. Think about the color overlays. Lots of children with disability use color overlays. It makes it easier for them to read. In all honesty, I believe that accessibility affects print too. Not in the same way it affects web. It's extra stuff as far as print design goes. As far as your test is concerned, though, print design not applicable. Web design needed for SEO. Testing. How do you test web designs? How do you test print designs? Exactly, Belinda, exactly. Things like that. How many of you are already in the habit of, once you've saved your art file, finished your homework, finished that assignment, saved your art file, exported the PDF, how many of you are actually pulling it up and looking at the PDF itself in Acrobat? Belinda does. Now, Belinda, how many times have you actually caught a mistake that you never even noticed in the art file, but when you pulled it up in PDF, it's like obvious? You're thinking, how did I miss that? Yes, it happens all the time. If you're not in the habit of doing that already, please start getting in that habit, because what happens, guys, is you sit in front of your computer with that art file and you work on it for hours. And you're so used to seeing it that suddenly those, yes, Belinda, those gaps of spaces or the alignment being off just a little bit, you're not noticing those things. Well, guess what? When you've closed that art file down and you've exported it, and you're closing everything, it's like an eraser to your brain. And so when you open it up in that PDF, you're looking at it with fresh eyes, and suddenly you start seeing all those little things that aren't quite right. And you go back and fix them. In web design, we test in different browsers, meaning you may test in things like Safari And then you're going to choose another web browser to test in, like Chrome or Firefox. Why? Because each browser will affect a website differently. It's just the way it is. They all have, every single web browser has its own set of default settings, margins, padding, things like that. And that will affect your overall web design. So it's very important that you always test it in your actual browser and not some built-in browser that you have. Muse has a built-in preview. It's kind of like InDesign's preview screen, you know, where you can turn off the margins, the margin lines and the bleed and all of that, and you can see what it would look like just like that, without all those purple lines and blue lines and red lines. You can see it just plain. Well, Muse has a preview screen that's much like that, that pulls the web page up, and it looks as if you were looking at it through your browser. But make no mistake, that previewer is not 100% accurate. Always view it in your actual web browser and don't rely just on the preview in Muse. That preview is great for just checking stuff real quick, making sure something's showing up, that sort of thing. But in the end, always check it in your browser when you're finished with it, just to make sure everything looks right in the actual web browser, because it will act different and respond differently in the preview in Muse versus what you find in your web browser. The message. In both web and print design, you are creating a message to your customers. What is the most important thing in getting your message across? It has to be appealing, right? Has to grab attention. Needs to be visual. You've heard all of this stuff in all of the other pre-design classes you've taken, right? It needs to be appealing. It needs to be visually pleasing. It needs to look good. That's where all those crap principles come in, right? Your contrast, your repetition, your alignment, your proximity. That's where all of those rules come into play, to make sure you get something that has an end result of being appealing, that gets attention, that makes people want to look at it, want to read it. The same thing applies to your website. And yes, those CRAP principles apply to your web design, just in a slightly different way. And we will be going over that in the next couple of weeks, so don't panic, because the reality is, guys, you already know the web design principles. You just have to learn to apply them slightly different than you do in print design. But all of that knowledge is already there. Your first screen. The first screen you see in Muse when you start creating a website is the plan view. Your plan view in Muse looks very, very, very much like a sitemap. Essentially what it is. There's a whole lot of stuff you can do in that plan view though, and we will be looking at some of that today, that makes things like creating your pages much easier. Muse actually has a master page, and it works very similar to the master pages in InDesign. Anything you put on the master page will show up on every single page. So what are some things that you might put on your master page? Your logo, absolutely. Your name. How about your navigation? It needs to be on every page, right? So things like that can go on the master page. What about your footer? Is the footer on a website usually the same on every page? Yeah, so your footer would be on the master page. So essentially, the master page is great for doing the header and the footer, because then you only have to do it once and it appears on every single page. So then you're just going through your pages and you're doing your main content area. It saves a whole lot of time, especially in web design. Because when you're coding, guess what? You're doing a whole lot of coding because you've got the pages and you have to code them all. There are some shortcuts you can do, like creating the header and the footer and copy and pasting, or saving that file as the next page and that file as the next page and so forth. But Muse has cut all of that in between out and given you a master page to do it with. And then you have, in the plan view, you can do things like add pages, remove pages. You can make a page a child page or a parent page. Add master pages and remove master pages. So in reality, in Muse, you can have more than one master page, because let's say that your header, your home page and your contact page have the navigation across the top of the screen horizontally. But your portfolio and your about page have a sidebar navigation so that it's vertical. Well, you could have two master pages, one for the home page and the contact page, and one for the portfolio and the about page. Still saves you time. You're only designing that twice, once horizontally, once vertically, and then you can apply it to which page you want it applied to. Now, child pages and parent pages. Does anybody know what a child page is?
Yes. Once I homeschooled my son, and I was trying to teach him about the government and stuff on one of his assignments. And I had pulled up the FBI website, and they actually have a child section where you can go there and it teaches them in their language. And it was pretty awesome.
That is pretty awesome. Specifically in web design, we need a new word than child page, but technically it is a technical term. But you are right, that child page that you went to, that's awesome. I could have used some websites like that when I was teaching my kids that stuff. But as far as web design goes, a child page is a subpage. It's kind of like that drop-down menu. You know, when you click on a button on a website and you get a drop-down menu and it gives you several other choices, those other choices are child pages. They are a child to the page they're connected to, that they drop down from. Like the sitemap, let's go back up here and look at this. These pages are all child pages. These 4 pages are a child page of the portfolio page. Your resume is a child page of the about page. So what does that make all of these pages? Yes, it makes them all parent pages. Top level pages are parent pages. Sub-level pages are child pages. However, what if I had another page off the illustration page? Now, what is this page? It's a child page. But what does it make the illustration page? It kind of makes it both, doesn't it? Because the extra page here, we'll say X page. X page is a child page of illustration, which makes illustration the parent to the X page. But illustration is also a child page to the portfolio. But it's all done in steps. So you can be both a parent page and a child page, or it can be just a child page or just a parent page. Make sense? Yes, basically that would make the portfolio the grandparents. Yes, still parent, but in this case, grandparent. Unfortunately, they don't have that term in web design, but yes, they should, because it's like it's been grandfathered. Okay, let's talk about design view. What view do you actually do the designing in? Well, design view. That is where you're going to spend most of your time, because that's where the actual designing occurs. That's where you're going to place your images, set your font, all of that kind of stuff is done in design view. You have an option bar. Just like all of your Adobe programs, there is an option bar in InDesign View. The bar may change in appearance just like the option bar in InDesign. You know that bar that's right above your artboard at the top of your screen? Think about when you're using InDesign. If you're placing an image and you're moving it around, that option bar has certain properties on it, right? There's certain options up there that you can use to click on to edit that image and size it and put strokes around it and that sort of thing. But if you click on a text box, that menu bar suddenly changes, right? Then suddenly you see things like the font size and your paragraph options and your leading and your kerning and your space before and space after, all of that good stuff you see on that top bar because it's changed. Muse's bar is just like that. You can click on an image and you're going to get certain options at the top. Click on text and those options are going to change to something different. So basically it changes based on what you have selected on the artboard. Rulers. There are two types of rulers in design view. One of them is your pixel increments ruler, which you guys are all used to seeing from Photoshop, Illustrator, InDesign if you've ever turned them on. It's just your regular normal ruler bar. Muse also has what's referred to as the breakpoint ruler bar. And this is how you make your site responsive, because you get to add breakpoints and then redesign the site based on that smaller size so that everything looks good at that size. And we'll get more into that in the coming weeks because you will be making your site responsive as we move through this. Your publish view. There is also the publish view, and I talked about this a little bit a few minutes ago. The publish view is your preview. It is a built-in web browser. It's based off of Chrome, but keep in mind, yes, it's based off of Chrome, but it does not necessarily react the way Chrome does. Always, 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 when you finish the page, check it in your web browser and go through it and make sure everything still looks good and responds the way it's supposed to. Because the preview doesn't always show some things, or it may show everything absolutely aligned and looking perfect, and then suddenly you pull it up in your browser and there's a big gap underneath that image. It didn't show that in preview, so you have to go back to your artboard, and sure enough, there's a bigger gap there than you want. Because like I said, every single browser has its own default settings as far as top margins and right left margins and padding and that sort of thing. And the built-in preview in Muse doesn't have those things. So you always want to be sure you test it in your actual web browser. How can you tell which view you're in? Well, at the top of Muse, all of you are familiar with the little box in the right-hand corner of Illustrator and Photoshop and InDesign, right? The one that says you can change to Essentials. In InDesign, you can change to Typography. In Photoshop, you can change to Advanced and several other options. You guys know what drop down I'm talking about that's up there in that top right hand corner? No. Well, the next time you open up Illustrator, InDesign, and Photoshop, look up there at the very top right hand corner. Most likely your set of essentials. That's what most of us use most of the time, is just essentials. It's pretty much has it all in it. But it's going to be a black word at the top that has a little arrow beside it, and it will say essentials. Now you know what I'm talking about. Yeah. Well, guess what? Muse is basically the same way. The difference is there's not a drop down in that top right hand corner. It's just 3 words. It's going to say plan view. I think it just says plan, if I remember right. It may say plan view, but it'll have a plan view. It'll show you design mode, and it will show you preview. I think it just says plan, design, preview. It's just 3 words, and the one that you're on will be highlighted, and the other 2 will be grayed out. Or you can click on another one, and it'll take you to that page. We'll go over that some more in just a few minutes. And how can you get out of each view? You can just simply close the X on the tab. In Muse, you have tabs just like you do in Illustrator, InDesign, Photoshop. When you have multiple files open, you have a tab, across the top, and you click the little X's to close those files. Well, in Muse, every view creates a tab. So to get out of that view, you can simply hit the X, and it'll take you back to the view you were in before. Now let's talk fluid and fixed. We talked about this a little bit ago when I was talking about the size versus print versus web, was fluid and fixed. The things you need to remember: a fluid layout is a layout that will resize to the browser's window. You can set the maximum width, but it will resize with the browser window. So if it gets smaller, it will actually get smaller. If it gets bigger, it will go to that max width. If you do not set the max width, it will be 100% of the browser window, meaning no matter how big their monitor is, that size is going to scale to that width. Your fixed layout is a static layout that does not resize to the browser window. We all hate going to those websites on our cell phones, don't we? Because you either have to zoom in to actually see it, or this page is huge and you're doing a lot of side swiping so you can read the text, because the page just keeps going on and on and on and on. So fixed layout is pretty much a thing of the past, guys. The only time the fixed layouts come into play really anymore, because sites have to be responsive. But if you find yourself developing a website that is for internal use, I don't know if any of you have ever worked for or do work for a company that has basically an employee website, and you can only access it in the company if you're in the office, and it has stuff on it that pertains to your job. Belinda knows what I'm talking about. Your husband has a job like that. Yes. If you find yourself developing a website like that, the customer is probably going to give you size requirements. Because why? All of the monitors in the office building are a certain size, and they know exactly how big they want this website. And so you're going to do a fixed website versus a fluid website. Common layouts. Should you use column-based layouts? Why or why not? Well, we're all familiar with columns, right? You guys use them in print design all the time. And by now, all of you should have had the class that went over your column grids. You guys remember that class? How many of you use the grid lines in Design and Illustrator to help set up your grids when you're actually designing stuff like postcards and flyers and brochures? Yeah, we all make those column-based grids to help us design. Helps keep our white space even, make sure that we have some consistency going on there. Well, guess what? In web design, we use a grid too. It's always a good idea to design using a grid. Columns in web design help create the grid structure. And Muse, you can actually specify how many columns you want. It comes in very, very, very handy in web design. Why? Because it helps you make sure you have an even amount of white space between buttons, and that you can apply the thirds rule when you have a big image on your home page or on your about page or something like that. It will help you put that image on there, make sure it's in a good place and everything looks good. Mostly it comes in handy for making sure you have things spaced out. The most common trend in web design right now is a very clean, crisp layout. Lots of white space. How many of you have noticed that websites seem to be, they have way more white space than they even did 2 years ago. There's lots more space between stuff. And the majority of websites have a white background now. Have you guys noticed that? Now you're all thinking about the websites you visited lately, aren't you? Yeah, now that you stop and think about it, all these websites have gone to having plain white backgrounds, and there's a lot more white space than there was before. Why is this? Well, it's simple. The reason why it's like that is because of responsiveness and how important it is for your website to be responsive now. And it's a lot easier to make things look responsive and to edit them and adjust them and things like that when you've got a lot of white space. And if you have a textured background, responsiveness can become pretty tricky, because when you scale that texture down so it fits on a cell phone size, a 320 screen, versus a 1024 screen that's on a desktop, suddenly that texture looks funny. And it doesn't look near as good as it did when it was scaled large. So they got away from doing things like that with the color and with the white space. Why color? Because on a desktop, when you have a background color, it's not so bad because the screen's pretty big. So everything is nice and spread out and that kind of stuff. But think about having to take that website and shrink it down from 1024 pixels to 320 pixels. Suddenly everything's kind of getting crammed together and stacked on top of each other, right? That's the way it is. A cell phone, you usually have to scroll down to see everything, right? You'll have a section and then something underneath it and something underneath that and so forth until you get to the bottom of the page. You usually don't get things side by side in a cell phone view. They're usually stacked on top of each other. That's responsiveness. But imagine having a background color. Everything spaced out looks awesome on the desktop view. But when you suddenly scale it down and it's 320 pixels, you have this color and you have things stacked on top of each other. Well, it can become complicated. Not only does it become harder for the user to read normally, because there's not enough white space that we can see around that color and see the text and things like that. And suddenly our text is blending in. The images are blending into that background color. Things like that. And of course, the complications with the way color looks on a desktop monitor versus the way that color looks on a cell phone. That kind of thing can get tricky. So that's why most websites have gone to a simple, clean, white background. And they have lots more white space. It's just easier to make the site responsive that way. Minimum width. In your settings, what does the minimum width control? It controls the smallest the screen size can be resized too, meaning the minimum width of the page size. So if that's what minimum width means, what does the maximum width mean? A maximum width means that's as big as the page can get, right? Now, do we use the minimum width in responsive design? Yes. Not on the initial size, however. We use it when we're making breakpoints. We will set a max width and a minimum width, sometimes just the minimum width, depending on what size the screen is. But minimum width means that's the smallest that screen size can go. So when we're talking responsiveness, what happens is you make your initial design. Let's say you start with a desktop. You make a desktop size. And then you create a breakpoint, which in Muse is called a breakpoint, but technically what it's doing in your CSS code is it's writing something called the media query. So that when somebody opens it on their tablet, let's say we make it tablet size, which is 768 to 920. Tablets range right in there. That tablet would pull up our website, and it would suddenly, that web browser would read through our CSS and say, ping, oh, look, there's a media query, and this is my size. So these are the things I need to do. So in those media queries, you set minimum and maximum. So I might say the maximum for the tablet view is 960 pixels. The minimum size for tablet view is 760 pixels. So if your screen size falls between here, you need to look like this. Otherwise, you need to go back to the desktop view or find the media query that applies to you. That's where we really start using the minimum and maximum. Your child page. I went over this already, but we'll hit on it again. When you add a page to your site in Muse, you do so by hovering over the page preview. You'll see the little plus sign. I'll show you that to you guys in just a moment. But when you're in plan view and you hover over one of the little thumbnails on the sitemap, it's going to give you a little plus sign. And you can either add that page to the right or left, which makes it a parent page, right? Or you can add that page to the bottom, which makes it a child page. Moving pages. You can also move pages in your site view. So let's say you set up your Muse document and you do the page for home, and then you do the one for contact, and then about, and then portfolio. And then you realize that's not really the order I wanted them in, but you've got them all designed. Or your customer tells you what order to put the pages in, you do them that way, and you send them all to him, and then he decides he wants those pages in a different order. Well, you've just spent hours designing all of these pages. Can't simply delete them and start over. That's going to take you more hours. Muse has made it very simple. You can simply click on a thumbnail and drag it to where you want it and drop it, and it will reorder everything. Your site pages. What are the types of pages in a site? You have your top level pages, also known as parent pages, that appear on the main menu bar navigation. Those first options that you see when you get on a website are top level pages. You have siblings. These are also considered top level pages. They are pages that are on the same level as each other. I know it sounds a little confusing. You're like, what? How many of you have been on a website that has two navigation bars? Usually you have your normal navigation bar across the top. It's a colored bar and has text for buttons. And then right underneath that navigation you see a secondary navigation that it just has text options. It's usually not colored. The text is usually a lighter color like gray, but it's like a secondary navigation bar. And it's different options, but it's still there. Yeah, you've seen that a couple of times. It's been quite popular here lately. Those are sibling pages. They are still top level pages because those pages are all on the same level, but they're siblings to the actual main navigation. Does that make sense? And then of course you have the child page. These are sub pages and can only be reached by their parent page. They are normally not shown in the navigation menu unless it's a drop down or hover menu. Browser feel. How do you add a background image or color? Well, in Muse, they've made it really, really simple. We'll be going over that too. If you have an image or color you would like to appear in the background, you can use the browser fill to accomplish this. If this image or color is going to appear on multiple pages, of course you do it on the master page. Direct select. Since Muse does not have a direct select arrow, how do you select an object inside of a group? There is no, quote, white arrow in Muse. It's black. So what do? You simply double click. All you have to do is double click on it, and the inside of whatever that grouped object is selected. Okay, guys, now we're going to go through all of this in Muse too, but I always like to do it verbally with the PowerPoint too, because I know you guys all learn differently. And so we did it that way, and now we're going to get into Muse and actually look at it. Share my screen here. Okay, can everybody see my Muse? Okay, I'm going to simply click on New. There we go. And it gives me my new site box. I'm going to make sure it says fluid width because we're making a responsive web design. The default size in Muse will come up to 960. I always change mine to 1024. Why? Sometimes I make the sites bigger than this, depending on the company and their target audience. But the fact is that how many of you remember even 5 years ago when you bought a computer, you got a really small monitor. It was like 13 inches. Now you buy a computer and you get a monitor that comes with it that's like 24 inches. Monitors have gotten bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger. So this 920, while it is that 960, while it is a common size, I tend to always up my size because monitors are much bigger now. And even when you're buying an inexpensive computer, your monitor is usually 20 plus inches. So I always shoot for usually about 1024. That seems to be pretty good no matter how big the monitor is, because 1024 is the normal viewing area. Like I have a 48-inch monitor on my Mac. It's huge. But when I pull up my web browser, I don't open the thing all the way so it expands across my page. I have it shrunk down to the size I like, which is about 1024. And it's the average viewing size. So that's usually the size I stick to unless it's a specific website and I know that, like if I'm doing a website for another printing company, well, they're going to get a lot of people that have bigger monitors. They may hit a lot of graphic designers, that sort of thing, looking for someone to print whatever they've designed. So I tend to make those a little bigger, but my normal websites, I usually stick to about 1024. And then you can set your columns. I normally start out with a 12-column grid. You can adjust this. There's a way once you've set this to go back and redo it, like the document settings and Illustrator and stuff. It's the page properties in Muse, and where you can change your grid. I normally start with 12 90% of the time I design with 12. Occasionally I'll make it less, but not very often. And then you have your advanced settings. This is where you can set your minimum width and your maximum height, your minimum height. Those are the two things you will set. Your minimum width, Muse defaults to 320. Why? It's the smallest cell phone size, right? 320 is the smallest cell phone screen you can have that has web enabled, where you can actually browse the internet. The minimum height you do want to set. What does that mean? Minimum height means the web page will at least be 500 pixels high. I usually make this less. I usually do 300 pixels. And I'll tell you why. There have been a lot of sites that I have done for small businesses that their contact pages, or they have some other page. I did one for a book business not long ago, and they had their monthly specials page, and they listed 2 books a month that were on special, that were on sale basically. And that page wasn't any more than 250 pixels, maybe. It might have been 300 pixels. But what happens in Muse is if you set the minimum height to 500 and that page only ends up being 300, guess what that does? It makes a whole lot of white space. And so the page looks funny. So if you set it out to be a minimum height of something small, you can stretch it because it'll get bigger as you add content. It will go on to 1,000, 3,000, 5,000 pixels. Depending on how much stuff you put on the page will continue to grow. But the minimum height is the minimum height, which means if you don't have enough stuff on that page to reach the minimum height, you're going to have this big gap of white space. And it's going to look funny in the web browser. So I usually set my minimum height to about 300. The default margin starts at 20 pixels. I usually don't adjust that unless I really, really need to. Most of the time I don't. 20 pixels is pretty average. You're going to want to make sure that your website is set to center. That means that doesn't mean that your content is going to center on your page. That means that the page itself will center in the browser. So if someone has their web browser scaled bigger than 1024 pixels, my web page is going to appear in the very center of their screen. And they'll have some white space on the right and left, unless, of course, I've set the browser fill and it will be a color or an image. If you have it set to left align, some of you have probably been to websites like this. They drive me bananas. They're left align. The website is on the left, and then you've got this awful amount of white space on the right, and it makes the whole page look funny. It just looks unbalanced. So make sure you set it to center. Your resolution needs to be set to standard. There is also a high DPI setting. This will make your page load slower. This setting is used for pages where you want the images to look better. If you were doing a graphics website that was full of a lot of graphics, you might choose something like that. It all depends on your target market. I have only ever used it once, and it was for a company that designs eyeglasses. They do a bunch of laser cutting and very custom eyeglasses type stuff. And they had a very specific target market. They didn't market to the public. This was something that they marketed specifically to eyeglass designers and that sort of thing. But because of their target market and the types of computers they had and that sort of thing, they needed to make sure they basically had high definition images. I used it then. That is the only time I've ever used it, because it does make your page load slower. But in their case, their target market expected that because they expected to see really good images. Next thing you want to do is make sure there is a check mark next to sticky footer. This way it keeps your footer at the very bottom of the page. And you're going to hit OK. This is your plan view. Yeah, it does. This is plan, design, preview, and you have this publish option. Publishing is uploading to Business Catalyst and that sort of thing. We'll go over that in week 4. Your main views, however, this is not actually a view. Your main views are plan, design, preview. And it automatically makes your home page. So the next thing you're going to do is you need to make your other top level pages. We're going to have a portfolio page. And an about page. I'll hit that plus sign again and have a contact page. Now, if you have child pages underneath your portfolio page, all you have to do is hover over it and you'll see right at the bottom there is a plus sign. You click it and it will make a child page. So let's say you make a child page and you don't want it. Well, if you hover over it, you see the little X in the top right hand of that thumbnail. You just click it and it will delete that page. And as we said about dragging, you can simply grab them, drag it. You see that little orange highlight? If I drop it, it moves the about page over. So you can drag them around the way you want them. And this is the master page. And you also have some views up here. If for some reason you're not seeing your thumbnails, if they're grayed out like that, be sure you put a check mark up here. Your master page badge. If you don't see a master under these, go ahead and click that master page badge so it shows you which master is assigned to each page, so that if you have more than one master, you can control where it's at. You can change the size. You can make it bigger. If you need to make those thumbnails bigger, you can do that. You can also turn them so that you have a side view versus top of the page, bottom of the page kind of thing. This view always confuses me, but it's a choice. So if you like that view better, absolutely click the button, use it. This is the view I prefer, but you know, each to his own, guys. So we're going to start playing with the master page. This is my master page, and as you can see, it's 300 pixels. Here's my ruler bar. This is my breakpoint ruler bar. Right now, it doesn't have any breakpoints on it. It shows my maximum width, and it shows my minimum width. But there's not actually any breakpoints there. These two guides, this guide here, this guide here, this is your header area. So you can adjust it by simply grabbing this blue arrow and pulling that guide down. This tells Muse that anything inside between these two guides is the header. Same with the footer. If the footer is too big, just grab this arrow and make it smaller. And let's say for some reason you put something on the page, but it doesn't make your page grow the way it's supposed to. It happens occasionally. It's just kind of a glitch in Muse. It does happen. Most of the time you'll put it on there and it'll automatically expand. You don't have any problem. But if you find yourself putting something on the page and the page doesn't automatically expand, you can go over here to the bottom. And this first little arrow, you see there's a double arrow here. This first one is the bottom of the page. You can pull it down and it will automatically make your page grow. Don't forget to go back up and grab your footer bar and pull it down where it's supposed to be. Now this second arrow is the bottom of the browser. If you want to add some white space at the bottom of the browser so it doesn't end with just your footer, you could add some of that white space down there if you wanted to. Normally you don't see that. I've never used it, but it is there if for some reason you want it. Now then, Muse, of course, has your CC libraries. which makes it very, very easy to bring in images and graphics from Illustrator or Photoshop directly into Muse without having to go to File and go to Place. Well, here's our logo. I grab it and then simply pull it out here to the screen and get a little spinny circle. There it is, and you can see it attached to your cursor there. I can just click up here in my header area, and there is my logo. I'm gonna have to make my header area bigger, of course, like that. There's my logo. Most likely my header is gonna be a little bit bigger than this because I'm gonna have a navigation bar under here. Or I could take this and put it over here and put my navigation bar beside it. But I think for this class, we'll make it in the center. I'm gonna center it up there. Now the best thing, and I do mean the best thing about Muse, is this widgets library. This little library is going to become your best friend. Why? Because it has a bunch of built-in widgets that will make your life so much easier. Let's take a look at the menus. You have a horizontal and you have a vertical. For your sidebar menu, right there. For your horizontal menu, right here. I'm gonna grab this horizontal menu and bring it out on my screen. Look what happened. It automatically says home, portfolio, about, contact. And guess what, guys? They're already linked. So your navigation is made for you right there. Can you adjust it and customize it? Absolutely. I'm going to put it up here like that. And I want to put it inside a colored bar here. So go like that. I'm going to change this fill color. I want to make it the same blue. Come on. Blue, 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 blue. There we go. I want it the same blue as my logo. So I'm going to send this to the back. Here's my navigation bar. Now I want my initial buttons the same color. It's really easy to customize this navigation bar. I'm going to click on the little gray box below where you see the text box. I'm going to click below that onto the gray box. And you see it turns my fill a gray color. I'm going to grab my eyedropper, make it the same color blue. Now I changed one button and look at that. It changed every single button for me. Makes things a lot easier. I also want to change the text. So I'm going to click on that text. There you go. I'm going to go over to my text panel and I'm going to change the type of font we're using. Helvetica, and I'm going to make those a little bit bigger. That's better. Now I want to space this out just a little bit more. There, there. Now if I click on this navigation bar and I click on that blue box again under the navigation bar, so I get just one button. You also have this little thing up here that says menu item. It says normal. If you click on that, you suddenly get the rollover, the mouse down, and the active. So I'm going to change the rollover color. It's gray here. I'm just going to go to my fill. I want it to be white on rollover. And I want the text to be blue. And I'm going to take this little box here and I want to make it as big as my actual navigation bar there. So now I have my rollover state. And mouse down. Let's make that a lighter shade of gray. I want to make it gray. And I want to make my text white. And of course we have the active. Well, I want my active to be white, just like I had my rollover. So I'm going to turn the background white and the text blue. So now I have a navigation bar. So if I go into, this is a good place to use preview, make sure everything's working right. Yes, let's go into preview so you can see how this is working. So now if I roll over contact, we get contact, about, portfolio, home. Now we can see I've got a little bit of an issue right here. My navigation bar is actually bigger than the background color I put to make an entire bar across there. So I'm going to close out our preview, go back to my master, and grab my magnifying glass so that I can zoom in here and see that. And I want to take this and make it just even. Come on. And then go back to preview. Much better. And if I click on one, it turns gray for a second and then goes back to being white because now I'm on the home page. So my navigation bar is working. And that widget made it very, very easy to create. So if I close out of that master page now, my navigation bar is on every single page for me, along with my logo. Makes things really, really quick. Makes them really, really simple so that you can do things quickly and apply it to every single page. Now for the home page, you would have to do things like filling in your content area, or if you wanted to apply a background image to just the home page, you could click on fill. Let's talk about that browser fill that we were talking about a little bit ago. If I click on the word fill, it opens this drop down box and it gives me the option to add image. And it gives me a little spinny. Let's borrow an image from, let's see if I have an image in here we can borrow. I may have, let me check my Adobe stock here and see if we have an image I can use to show as the background. I really wanted to use one of my images from my Creative Cloud library, which you can. There is another way to set the background image. If I go to my Creative Library, you can either do it from the field if that image is saved to your computer. If it's in your CC library, however, you have to do it this way. Let's go to Splash Ideas. And I want to borrow this image. I'm going to bring it out, go up here to this very top corner and we'll click. That's a very large image. And I'm going to have to zoom out some more. See it all. You see how my page automatically expanded with that, right? Let me bring it back in here. Come on. There we go. Responsive width and height. Yep, that will work. And I'm going to go. Come on. I have to do this on my master page, guys. Why? Because it's going to go automatically go behind my header and footer. Otherwise, it's going to cover it up. So I'm simply going to cut it. And go back to my side view here. I'm going to duplicate this page. And I'm just going to call it home. That's the only page that's going to have this master page. I'm going to go in here and paste, rearrange this, send it to the back, and I want to turn the opacity down. There we go. And go back to my site view. Now, on my home page, I need to apply this master. I can right click. And I'm going to go to masters. And this time I'm going to choose home. And it applies that home master. So now I can open it up and continue with designing on top of it, except for that looks a little light in this view. Let's look at it in preview and see if that image is still light. Nope, it's not that light. Okay. Now, most likely I will darken this back up, but for now, we can look at it like this, because what I plan to do is put a floating main content area over the top of it. Do that. I'm going to fill it with white. And the resize here, this is your responsive setting. Responsive width and height, stretch to browser width. I want responsive width and height. And Muse has this nifty little way of adding drop shadows. You can add drop shadow, you can add a bevel, you can add a glow. I'm going to use it as a drop shadow. And turn the distance down just a little bit. Like that. And let's darken that picture back up now. And I'm going to put the main content in that area. So now let's say my page is much longer. We would need to add some stuff to this to make it longer. But what's going to happen is I'm also going to pin this. I'm going to pin it. So if I go into preview, and I'm going to scale this so that it's actually down, it will actually scroll the way it's supposed to. Now, how many of you have seen the moving backgrounds? When you scroll, the picture moves. That is done with pinning. I'm going to pin that one to the top. And then go back to my preview. This page isn't long enough for you to get the effect. And when we start doing the mock-ups next week and stuff, I'll show you specifically how to do that. Right now, there's not enough stuff on here. But you get the idea. You can do some pinning to make things stay there so that they scroll. You could make it so that your navigation bars scroll down your page with the user. If you have a really long page, that's always a good idea. But there's all kinds of nifty stuff you can do with Muse that makes it really simple. It didn't take us long to do that, and we have a basic setup of a web page, right? And again, these widgets are going to be your best friend because they are what save the most time. You've got buttons that you can pull out. You've got your compositions, which are like slideshows, and your featured news. We've all seen boxes like this on the internet. Well, here's one you just pull out and you change the information to what you want it to be. There are light boxes and presentations, your tooltips. And then, of course, you have your forms. There's a detailed contact form and the simple contact form. And all of these can be customized. We've looked at the menu. So now we have our panels, the accordion panels. How many of you have seen those boxes where it looks like a button and you click on it and suddenly the button expands and there's information for you to read? We've all seen those, right? That's an accordion. And then you have the tabbed panels, where you click on a tab and it opens a different box and has information on it. Some of you may want to use things like that on your contact page. And then you have your portfolio assets, which is your slideshow. You have a basic slideshow, the blank one that's not already pre-filled with the images. It's basically the same as the basic, except for the basic has pre-filled images that you replace. You have a full screen. What you must remember about this full screen, guys, is if you use it, it will cover up your logo and your navigation bar unless you have them set to floating, and so that they're automatically on top. We'll get into how to do that later, but if you use the full screen, that's what you'll need to do. But we also have this light box. The Lightbox slideshow is really cool. Let's pull it out. I'm going to put it on my screen for a second so I can show you guys this. This is going to give you some ideas on what to do for your website. I'm going to make this box a little bigger. And let's go into preview. Now, now we're scrolling. See how that works? So now, what happens when you use the Lightbox is that slideshow is not suddenly right here. You end up with these little thumbnails. But when you click on a thumbnail, it gives you that grayed out background, like you see on so many websites lately, where it shows your slideshow. So if you use something like this Lightbox, you have to remember that the slideshow does not show when you first see that page. You have to click on something. So what I usually do is I grab this Lightbox, select it all, and I move it out of my way. It's not important that it be on your page. The only thing that's important that's on your page are these thumbnails. And I take this box and I make it bigger, not quite that big. And then you have your thumbnails. I'm going to select them all and make them bigger. And then kind of line them up where I want them. Uh-oh, to make my box smaller, this back over here. There we go. So now I have my thumbnails. And you have all kinds of different things you can do. You can set your transition, you can make it auto play, you can shuffle it, those sort of things. But now if I preview it, now this looks much better than just little bitty thumbnails on a page, right? This looks a little more organized. Now you would definitely want to do a second row, 6 images, so that you had an even amount. Otherwise, you would want to make sure this white box was a lot smaller so that it fit and you didn't have all this white space. But still, if you click one, that light box automatically comes to the center of the page and it grays it out. Now then, you also have, if you click on the light box itself and click that little blue arrow, you get some options. You've got your freeform thumbnails. If you click that, What that means is you can go up to your thumbnails and actually move them around. So if you only had 3, you might do an interesting kind of layout that kind of took up space instead of everything being in one row. Come on, select. There we go. So you might rearrange those so that everything looks good on the page. That way, when the person previewed it, it would be interesting and not simply a straight line. Make sense? So these thumbnails are going to become your best friends, guys, because they make things so much easier. Once you've picked your slideshow, and you can do different slideshows, and they can all change in size. Let's get rid of this slideshow. Let's say you wanted to do a banner across your page, a banner slideshow. Well, you could use your basic to do that. And I'm going to turn off a few things first. I'm going to turn off the caption, the counter, the previous, the next. And I'm going to make it autoplay. And then I'm going to resize it. And put it right underneath there. And I could even add a shadow to it. That way, it would be a banner across that page. And it will automatically play and show what images. What you have to remember about using banner slideshows is that your images must be wider than they are high. So the width must be greater than the height, so that when you put them in here, they don't look skewed or pixelated. And it's not cutting part of the important part of the image off. You have to kind of watch that in all of your slideshows, but for the most part, you can manually scale them. If I were to take this and double click on it, you see this brown bounding box. That's the image itself. So I could move what part of the image is shown in the slideshow so that it gets the part I want it to get, or I could scale it down and in this one it wouldn't necessarily be a banner, it would just be in the middle of the screen like that, but all the other images would stay the same. I've just manually edited that one image. The rest of them would pop up in banner. Now, if you're doing a banner ad, I do not recommend that. Make sure all of your pictures are wide. Otherwise, it's going to look funny. But in your regular slideshows, you may have to do that occasionally to some of your images. And then, of course, you have the social media widgets. And there is a widget in here for just about every thing you can think of. There is the Adobe Muse badge. If you want to show off your Muse design skills on your website, you might want to take that and put it in your footer area. Make this footer just a little bit bigger. You might want to show off those design skills there. And as you see, it gives you some options. Color scheme, light. If you were to go to dark, it looked like that. And then, of course, your Facebook like icon. We see those on just about every single website we go to nowadays, right? And there's the follow button. You can even pull out. And this is a good thing to put on things like your about page or even your contact page, where it shows the comments, and your customers that view your website can leave you comments on your Facebook page from your website. Google Maps. This is always very convenient for your contact page, even if you're just showing the area in which you service. The Google Plus icon, the LinkedIn, the PayPal by now, the Pinterest, the pinned icon. We see those on pretty much every page we go to nowadays too. The Twitter follow and the Twitter tweet. Vimeo if you're making recordings, and YouTube, of course. And there are all sorts of third-party widgets you can download. A lot of them are free. Some of them are not. We will get more into those widgets as we move through the weeks, and I will show you some good places to download some free widgets that will do things like, let me open my library. When you download a third-party widget, it doesn't go into your widget library, it goes into your actual library. But there's a few slideshow widgets in here that this is like a page flip. And the spinning thing again. We may not be able to see this until I actually put some images in it. Let's see if it'll pull up the images. Nope. I'm going to have to, let's choose an image. Let's borrow some from Splash Ideas. Let's borrow another one. So you guys can see what this slideshow actually does. Let's set it up there. Let's go into preview. Oops, my logo is stuck down there. Did I have it set to autoplay? I can't remember. Make this bigger. Let's go back. Looks like I put my slideshow a little too far up. There we go. Oh, we can't see my box. Come on. There we go. Now let's check out my preview. My logo is still stuck down here. Why are you sticking there? This is the crazy thing about preview. It looks like we have an issue with my logo. But why? Let me try pulling out the slideshow again. Yes. And delete those, image width. That works. Animation time, 0.8. Oh, the arrow white PNG. Let's see if I can select something else. I think I have an arrow in here. It's the envelope. Sign. Up arrow. Let's use that. Okay, now let's preview it and see if it'll actually work. My logo is still bumping down to the bottom. There's my up arrow. So if I click that, it's a page flip. It's just kind of a different.
What?
A different idea for your slideshow. I'm wondering if I accidentally pinned that in my master pages. Let's take a look.
It's not being a butthead.
Nope, I didn't pin it.
All right, go put a shirt on. You can run around. You can run around a shirt if you want to. Wait. Stupid stuff.
You also have, you can download all kinds of slideshows for free. There's a playing card, and there's tools before and after. If you have a lot of photo manipulation or restoration examples, this is an awesome slideshow for that, because it will show them the before and after, and when they roll their mouse over, it'll roll to the before picture and the after picture, so they get a good look at it. So that's a really cool slideshow. There's also some stuff you can download for SEO, and the responsive navigation bar that gives you that little hamburger menu when your screen gets so small. You can download that free plugin, that free widget. I'll show you how to do that too in later weeks. And then of course, there's also plenty of plugins that you can purchase from like Muse Pin. They have a special Skype button, so they can click on that Skype button and open their Skype box and chat with you that way. And there's also a Skype call button that's included with that. There's an option in the little tool menu when you pull it on your screen. And there's the mobile drop down, which is another hamburger responsive menu. And there's the custom buttons. One of them is a call button and one of them is talk button. But the Muse Skype button works the same way. And then of course you have, I don't know if any of you are familiar with Jot Forms. It is a way to quickly and easily make website forms and customize them. And then you can just pull out your Jot Forms plugin. You make them online and you save them. Pull out that Jot's plugin and it gives you the number to that form. After you made it, it gives you a little number. And if you plug that into your Jot Form widget, it automatically pulls that contact form in for you. And there is also a blog widget. If you pull it out, you can connect your blog to your website, so that your stuff that's already on your blog will appear, and it will allow users to leave you messages like they would on your blog site from your actual website. So there are all kinds of absolutely cool widgets you're going to use, which is why I say these are going to be widgets library. The widgets in general are going to be your best friend, guys, because they're going to make your work so much easier and so much quicker. So there are all kinds of things to play with in Muse, and what I suggest, guys, is once you get your homework done, spend a few minutes just playing around with Muse. Try out the tools. You cannot hurt anything. We're going to really start getting in depth and learning them next week, but start introducing yourself to them. Play with it. Bring out some widgets and look at them and see how they work. When you bring out a widget, just remember to click on your preview so that you can actually click on them and move them around and see what they're doing. So I encourage you to open up your Muse and take a few minutes just to kind of play around and see what's there. You have your basic drawing tools. You have a rectangle and you have an ellipse. Now, if you needed a rounded rectangle, you can do that. Remember how we talked about the menu bar changing based on what you had selected? Well, this little icon, you can change, and you're going to get rounded corners. Like that. Now, if you were to make a text box, got the type tool just like all of your other programs. Type some stuff in there. It has all of your basic tools: bold, italics, underlines, bold. There's your size. There's your center, left align, right align, justify. This is your line. This is your bullets. You can do bullets, or you can do numbers, which is your ordered list. And you can also set your line height, but it doesn't look like, you can't set it from the top menu bar. You have to use your character tools, which is your leading. You can set that right there, and it's in percent, and it will make the next line of text. You turn that up, it'll spread them out. And you can also add your right margin, your space after, all the stuff you're familiar with. You can also make things a hyperlink. If you needed to link a certain word to another website, you would simply click on that hyperlink and open link a new window and type the web address in there. And we'll get more into exactly how to apply hyperlinks and things like that as the week moves on. I don't want to overwhelm you guys. So just take a few minutes when you get the chance and open Muse and just kind of play with it a little bit. Look at those widgets. Go through each one of them, pull them out on your screen and see what they do. Because it very well may start giving you some creative ideas that you're going to need for next week when we do the mock-up of your website and stuff and make your wireframe. So go ahead and play with those widgets. Pull each one of them out, see what they do, and see what kind of creative ideas that generates for you. All right, guys?
I have a question.
Tonight was just kind of an introduction to Muse. We will get very specific and in-depth starting next week with how to use the tools and set things up. So if you thought this was a little too fast, calm down. Don't worry. We'll be going over all of this again. I just kind of wanted to introduce you and show you some things that Muse is capable of, because it's capable of a lot of stuff, which means you can make really good designs. Guys, our lectures next week will be the exact same days, Monday, Tuesday, and Wednesday, 2 p.m. Mountain Time. If you have any questions or you need anything, please don't hesitate to reach out to me. Karen, you have a question about Muse and Animate CC, okay?
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. My question is, right now I'm still struggling to try and finish an assignment in anime, and I'm having computer issues, and I'm a little concerned about jumping into Muse as well.
You have Animate and Muse this month?
No, I because I was having computer problems, I'm still finishing or trying to attempt to finish a class from last night.
Oh, because you had computer issues. Well, Muse is probably going to be a lot more simpler on your, a lot more easier on your computer than Animate is. Animate takes an awful amount of virtual memory. Just to run, it takes a lot of virtual memory. Muse doesn't take near as much memory as Animate does. So it will actually probably be a little easier on you, but if you start running into trouble, just let me know and we'll see if we can't get it fixed. Okay. All right, guys. Well, unless you have some more questions, then we'll call it an evening. And of course, if you need me, I'll be in the SSC on Thursday and Friday. Christy will be in the SSC all week long. Her schedule is posted in the announcements. Or you can simply email me and we'll set a time where I can open up my Zoom room and we can meet.
I have a question. I'm sorry.
Okay.
When might this be available for you? Again, because I missed a few pieces because I had to pick up my son.
I will have it up. Let's see. My next lecture starts in 15 minutes. So you can bet this will be up in about 2 hours.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
Okay. I'll see you later, guys.